madrasa in Lahore. Big, tall, very respected, somewhat feared individual, and imposing figure. Several times since that visit, he's run into our project director, and each time he's mentioned that question that I asked, and he says it has caused me to ask myself, what would the Prophet have me do? So at the end of the day, I feel like it's about as good as it's going to get in terms of trying to play to an accountability that transcends the immediate political environment. After one of those sessions, two different madrasa leaders came up. One of them came up to me, and he had a smile on his eyes, smile on his face, his hand over his heart. And he says, "You have made me so very, very happy." He says, "We thought all Americans hated us." Well, I'm thinking to myself, if you're gauging by the media in the West, that's probably not an unfair conclusion for him to have made. Another madrasa leader came up and had quite a tale to tell. He said that there was a situation in his village where a young lady had been caught talking on the cell phone at 2 in the morning to a young man in an adjacent village in whom she had an interest. And the tribal elders had felt that this had violated their code of honor, and the immediate reaction was to kill her mother, her sister, and the boy's mother, and to slice off the boy's nose and his ears. And this madrasa leader said that ordinarily he wouldn't interfere because these things happen, but he felt compelled to intervene on religious principle based on the discussions he'd been having in our workshop on human rights. And so he went back with some trepidation, and he pointed out how in the Quran there was no prohibition against a woman talking to a man, and he also appealed to the passages that urged the peaceful resolution of differences, and he pulled it off. And hopefully that becomes a precedent in that village for time to come, but also perhaps other villages as well. One doesn't know. But it was a situation where religion clearly trumped tribalism, and as I said, this is where one ends and the other begins is almost an unknown for many people. And it's not always a given, though, that religion's going to trump, because as these people will point out to you, their tribal customs go back 3,000 years, where Islam is only 1,400 years. So that's one of the things we deal with. Well, in one of our first all-Wahhabi workshop that we had up in the Lahore area, one of the participants was a Taliban commander of some renown. And he and our project director engaged in some discussions, and it was quite clear. You just look at a picture of him, and he was very despondent. He'd lost 2 sons in the fighting, and he said, we simply don't know what America wants. You come after us with guns, we have no recourse. So this led to an invitation for me to come up into the mountains to meet with the senior leadership to tell them what America wants. And 2 months later, I did that. And so I was up there in the mountains of Pakistan meeting with most of the people there were from Afghanistan, but these were tribal commanders and some tribal chiefs and religious leaders as well, but Taliban commanders I meant. And it was quite an interesting session. I mean, it was a fairly small room. It was almost standing room only. And these people had come across the mountains for this meeting. So I told them that why I was there was to see if we could formulate a confidence-building measure that could point toward peace. But in order for them to do that, they needed to understand the Western perspective on this situation. And in that regard, I told them what America wanted was for them to distance themselves from Al-Qaeda, lay down their arms, and reconcile with the Karzai government. And then we went into a great discussion period, and there were about 5 major questions that emerged. The first question was, what do the American people want? And I take great comfort in the fact that we still seem to enjoy people giving us the benefit of the doubt overseas, even after we've re-elected what it is they think is the problem. But they were cutting us some slack. So I told them, I said, well, what the American people would like to see is peace in the region with democratically stable governments in Iraq and Afghanistan. Then they wanted to know why the United States was attacking Islam. And I told them they weren't. Through the rest of the past interventions on behalf of Muslims. They wanted to know why the U.S. attacked Afghanistan. And I said, well, to put that in terms that you understand and feel strongly about, hospitality, loyalty, and revenge, I said, before we recognize certain members of Al-Qaeda as a threat in this country, we welcomed them into our country, extended our hospitality, and then without warning they struck. I said we wanted revenge, so we asked the Taliban government to turn over Al-Qaeda's leadership so we could bring them to justice. They refused, so we attacked. I said, but we did so with a heavy heart. Most Americans feel great admiration and respect for the Afghan people stemming from our common struggle against the Soviet Union. I said also it's important for you to recognize that some of your own tribal leaders are now banding together against Al-Qaeda because they violated your hospitality as well. Then the next question, which is a little more challenging, it was why we attacked Iraq. And to move on to the following one, I just sort of finessed that, and I said that too. I said there's some debate about it, but as far as I was concerned, that was also a matter of revenge. Saddam Hussein had attempted to assassinate an American president. So moved on to the next one, which was why the United States support Israel. And there I said, the United States has a strategic relationship with Israel. It's not going to change anytime soon. I said, but what is changing is our understanding of, compassion for, and support of the Palestinian people. I said, over time, that's going to make a difference. And so then we broke for prayer, and by the way, there were lots of other things said, some of which don't bear repeating, but it's very clear that in a culture where honor is such a principal commodity, one has to be careful of how one conducts oneself. And one young man, I say young, just because I'm so old, but one young man, I think in his late 30s probably, was a leader of about 350 Taliban. Very impressive, had understood 4 languages, and he was a key catalyst for us coming to a useful conclusion in this whole discussion. We did some one-on-one interaction, and he was telling me there about how he and his wife were walking, and they were confronted by American military. Made hold their hands up, way up in the air, and confronted with some very coarse language in the process. This was just devastating to him. It was so humiliating in front of his wife to have this sort of thing happen. And so he became a convert. And that kind of matched something else we'd been told by a madrasa leader, how a young man in school at madrasa, he and his family were very opposed to the Taliban and Al-Qaeda until a U.S. bomb dropped on their home and half the family was killed. And so not only that child himself, but he recruited his entire class to leave and go fight the Americans. So a lot of this is the fog of war, but some of it's gratuitous and it doesn't need to happen. And so our people, and one can't sit in judgment either, because you don't